They called it the Society Wedding of the Year, Braxton Wealth marrying Langston Promise. But Miriam Grace Langston hadn't come to celebrate. As she adjusted the delicate gold chain around her neck in the guest suite of the Braxton estate, the 68-year-old woman reached into her pocket and touched the antique key hidden in her silk purse, evidence of a legacy stolen from her family decades ago. Martin Braxton had built his pharmaceutical empire by erasing her late husband's revolutionary work from the annals of history. He never imagined that the elegant black woman seated quietly in the third row would one day own nearly 41% of Braxton Health through layered trusts and shadow partners. Nor could he have foreseen that her grandson, Marcus Langston, was about to marry his only daughter. Miriam hadn't spent the last 35 years cultivating invisible power to watch her grandson become entangled with the very family that once destroyed hers. The Braxtons had mastered the art of optics, but Miriam had mastered patience. And today, their pristine, picture-perfect legacy was about to fracture, not with a bang, but with the silent drop of a digital file sent to the right inbox at just the right moment. The Braxton estate sprawled across 40 acres of lakeside splendor, its grand Georgian columns rising like a monument to old money and curated reputations. A steady procession of Bentleys and Maybachs inched through the gated entrance as waitstaff in pressed uniforms readied crystal glassware and canapes for the welcome brunch. Guests in couture dresses and tailored suits milled about the terrace, their laughter rising and falling like well-rehearsed theater. Among them, a dented black Prius pulled up to the valet stand, mostly unnoticed. Marcus Langston stepped out in a perfectly pressed navy suit, walked around, and opened the door for his grandmother. "We made it, Grandma," he said, his voice warm but tight. Miriam emerged slowly, her posture regal despite the cane she rarely needed. Her silver-streaked afro was wrapped in a soft turban the color of storm clouds. She wore a plum dress, not flashy, but unmistakably elegant, and simple pearl earrings. Her eyes scanned the estate grounds, and for a fleeting second, something passed across her face. Recognition, pain, but just as quickly, it vanished. "Indeed, we did," she said, voice even. The valet, young and distracted by the Lamborghini behind them, gave them only a perfunctory nod before turning his attention elsewhere. Marcus didn't miss the disinterest in the young man's eyes, or the way his grandmother's presence was minimized before it could even register. As they walked toward the house, Marcus's mother, Denise, greeted them near the archway. She was flanked by her younger brother Leonard and his daughter Sydney, a budding activist and high school senior already capturing moments for her blog. "Put that thing away, Sid," Denise whispered, nodding toward the phone. "They don't like cameras around here unless they hired them." Sydney rolled her eyes but slipped the phone into her bag. "They," she muttered under her breath. "You mean the Braxtons?" Miriam didn't say a word, but her expression said plenty. From the top of the steps, Arabella Braxton, the bride, stepped out in a crisp ivory sundress that danced in the light breeze. Her platinum hair was styled to perfection, her smile wide but strained. "You're here," she called, skipping the last 2 steps to greet them. She kissed Marcus on the cheek, then turned to Miriam. "Mrs. Langston, I'm so glad you made it." "I wouldn't miss my grandson's wedding," Miriam replied evenly. "And your family has certainly spared no expense." Arabella laughed lightly and slid her hand into Marcus's. "Come on, I want to show you the garden before the brunch starts. The dahlias are finally blooming." As the couple walked off, Miriam remained behind, observing the rhythm of the Braxton household like a chess master watching a board mid-game. Every movement, every glance, was calibrated, but she was not there to blend in. She was there to remind them what they thought they'd buried. In the Braxton estate's rose garden, Arabella's tension eased visibly as she and Marcus strolled between rows of fragrant blooms. "I've missed you," she said, her fingers brushing his. "These last few days have been madness." "Weddings tend to do that," Marcus replied, though his smile was distant. "You seem tense." Arabella nodded. "My family's obsessed with perfection. The color palette, the guest list, even the seating chart. It's like a corporate launch party disguised as a marriage." Marcus hesitated. "I notice my grandmother's suite is in the north wing. That's a bit isolated." Arabella's fingers twitched at her dress hem. "Mom thought she might appreciate the quiet. It's more private." "She's not staff, Arabella. She's my family." "I know," she said quickly. But the arrangements were made weeks ago, and, well, it's complicated. Marcus said nothing, but a thought rooted itself in his chest. A growing suspicion that this wedding was not just a union, it was a performance. Back on the terrace, guests sipped champagne as jazz floated across the lawn. Miriam sat with Denise and Leonard at a small table beneath a magnolia tree. Though her face remained serene, her eyes watched everything, the subtle discomfort of guests when approaching their table, the way others whispered behind sunglasses and practiced smiles. At a nearby table, a woman in a blush Chanel suit leaned toward her companion. "I didn't realize the groom's family was so diverse," she said, her voice dipping at the end. Her companion chuckled, swirling his drink. Martin Braxton always loved his experiments. Remember that scholarship for inner-city STEM students? Same project, different packaging. Miriam's jaw didn't move, but her hand tightened around her glass. Marcus noticed and rose halfway, but she touched his arm lightly. "Not worth it," she murmured. "Choose your battles wisely." Across the terrace, Martin Braxton stood like a silver-haired patriarch, surveying his domain with the practiced confidence of a man used to being admired. His eyes eventually found Miriam. For a moment, time folded. His posture shifted ever so slightly, the confident smile thinning as recognition dawned. Miriam met his gaze, unflinching, unforgiving. Then she raised her glass in a cool, deliberate toast. Martin turned away. Near the dessert table, Sydney pulled out her phone, casually filming the immaculate macaron tower for her blog when Arabella's cousin Trey, a smug 26-year-old with a trust fund and too much free time, stepped into her frame. "Excuse me," he said with exaggerated politeness. "The help isn't supposed to film guests. Privacy issue." Sydney's smile vanished. "I'm not the help. I'm the groom's cousin." Trey blinked, then smirked. "Oh, honest mistake. You just looked comfortable serving yourself." Before Sydney could respond, Marcus was there, his jaw tight. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Trey's smirk faltered. "Misunderstanding. No big deal." "She's family," Marcus said loud enough for others to hear. "My family." Arabella rushed over, her eyes wide. "Trey, this is Sydney. She's Marcus's cousin." "I'm so sorry." Trey gave a shrug that wasn't quite an apology. "Didn't mean anything by it." Sydney slipped her phone away. "It's fine," she muttered. But it wasn't. Later that evening, as the pre-dinner cocktail hour wound down, Marcus found Miriam alone near the koi pond. She watched a blue heron stalk its way through the reeds. "You've been quiet today, Grandma." "I'm observing," she replied. "That's what I do best." "They underestimated you." "They always do." Marcus sat beside her, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. "We don't belong here." "Of course we don't," she said gently. "We were never invited to belong. But outsiders see what insiders are trained to ignore." He turned to her, something sharp behind his voice. "You never talk about your past." "Before Grandpa." Miriam gave a knowing smile. "Some stories are like seeds. They only sprout when the time is right." Just then, Arabella's mother, Veronica Braxton, approached with a well-practiced smile. "Mrs. Langston," she said smoothly, "do you have something a bit more festive for tomorrow?" "Navy is a touch somber for a summer wedding." "My dress is perfectly suitable," Miriam replied, calm but firm. "Well, we just want the photos to be perfect," Veronica insisted. "I'm sure they'll be lovely," Miriam said. "With or without my color choices." Veronica blinked, then turned and walked away. Marcus looked at his grandmother. "Do you think this is a mistake?" Miriam straightened his tie. "Marriage is between two people, but also between two legacies. One of truth, one of appearances. Just remember this. Weddings are masks. Some last longer than the vows." Marcus blinked. "What do you mean by that?" Instead of answering, Miriam reached into her purse and touched something Marcus couldn't see, a golden key. "Come," she said. "They're waiting for us." The rehearsal dinner transformed the Braxton Estates grand ballroom into a lavish showcase, glittering chandeliers above, linen-draped tables below, white orchids dripping from every surface. String quartets played softly, and rows of wine glasses sparkled like polished gems. Marcus sat beside Arabella at the head table. Her fingers laced through his under the linen, a silent plea for composure. Around them, the Langston side of the family took up a modest corner of the room. The Braxtons? They sprawled with the weight of generations. Martin Braxton stood and tapped his glass. The room hushed, reverent as a church. He smiled like a statesman. "Tomorrow," he began, "my daughter Arabella will join her life with Marcus Langston, a man of character, ambition, and drive. Qualities that echo our family values." Marcus forced a polite smile. He could feel the weight of the compliment, The subtle framing that Arabella was marrying up, that his worth had been weighed, tested, and deemed acceptable. Martin raised his glass. To the merging of two legacies. New beginnings. Applause followed. Waiters resumed service. Conversations reignited. Then Trey Braxton, half-drunk and red-cheeked, stood with a crooked grin. "My turn," he announced, lifting his champagne flute. Marcus tensed. Trey wobbled slightly. "To my cousin Arabella. Always classy. Always elegant. And now, a champion of diversity." He laughed at his own joke. A ripple of nervous laughter spread. And Marcus, smart, driven, came from humble beginnings. His smirk deepened. Didn't inherit his gifts from the Braxton side, obviously. Another laugh. And let's not forget his lovely family, especially Grandma Langston, who's brought such cultural richness to this table. Trey lifted his glass toward Miriam, then slurred in a mock drawl. "She ain't here to clean, y'all. She's here to bless us with civil rights magic." Silence. For half a second, the entire room froze. Then came the awkward laughter, thin and panicked. Veronica Braxton's smile twitched. Martin Braxton said nothing. Arabella looked stunned, unable to speak. Marcus stood slowly, his chair scraping the marble. "I think that's enough," he said. Trey rolled his eyes. It was a joke. "Relax, man." Marcus scanned the faces around the table. Some embarrassed. Some amused. Most silent. "My grandmother deserves respect," he said clearly. "My family does." He turned to Miriam. "Come on, Grandma. We're leaving." Miriam rose, every inch of her posture regal. Denise and Leonard stood too. Sydney followed, her eyes burning with anger. Together, they left the ballroom, the murmur of judgment chasing them out. On the terrace, Marcus paced furiously. How could they just sit there? How could Arabella say nothing? "Marcus," Miriam said, stopping him with a hand on his chest. "You want justice? Then don't waste it on tantrums. Patience is the weapon they never see coming." Marcus's voice cracked. "Why don't they respect us? After all this time, all the dinners, the holidays, the rehearsals, why are we still outsiders?" Miriam looked at him, her voice heavy with the weight of decades. "Because we challenge the story they tell themselves about who deserves to be in the room." The glass doors opened again. Arabella stepped out, her face pale. "Marcus, please," she said, approaching. He was drunk. He didn't mean it. Marcus stared at her. "He mocked my grandmother's race in front of everyone. And your family said nothing." "I'm not defending him," she whispered. "But this is getting out of hand. My father has media contacts here. This wedding is important for his business." "More important than human dignity?" Arabella opened her mouth but couldn't answer. Through the window, Martin Braxton watched them. But his gaze wasn't on Marcus. It was on Miriam. And in his expression, not curiosity, fear. The doors opened again, and Veronica approached with a smile too tight to be genuine. "Everything all right?" she chirped. "Just cooling off," Miriam said smoothly. "Wonderful. Dessert is being served. And then the band. Shall we?" As Veronica ushered Arabella back inside, Martin stepped out. His tone lowered, meant only for Miriam. "You're playing with fire," he said. "You think you know the game, but you don't know the woman you've become." Miriam's eyes twinkled. "You're not talking to me," she said. "You're talking to yourself." Inside, the party resumed. Trey had vanished. The band played upbeat swing, and the Braxtons toasted louder than before, overcompensating, pretending the rupture hadn't happened. But the cracks had already started. That night, in the north wing, Sydney sat on her bed, typing furiously. Her post went live before midnight. "Tonight at my brother's rehearsal dinner, this is how his fiancé's family treated our grandmother, a woman who raised us after our dad died, who paid for Marcus's tuition, who built everything from nothing." They laughed. We walked out. #Langston Truth, #Braxton Shame. The video spread like wildfire. And by morning, the world would be watching. The next morning, the Braxton estate was under siege. News vans lined the gates. Camera lenses peered through iron bars. Reporters shouted questions at arriving guests. Security tightened. Publicists barked orders. The wedding of the year had transformed overnight into a crisis management operation. Inside the mansion, Veronica Braxton paced the breakfast room in silk pajamas, her phone glued to her ear. "I don't care what it costs, take the video down," she hissed. "Offer cash. Threaten lawsuits. Do whatever it takes." Martin Braxton sat at the end of the table, his tablet open to a flood of headlines. Braxton wedding meltdown, viral video sparks outrage. Langston family humiliated at elite ceremony. The hashtag Braxton shame was trending. It's too late, Martin said, unusually quiet. It's already viral. We'll deny it, Veronica snapped. Say it was doctored. Blame the editing. Martin didn't look up. A dozen people heard Trey's toast. Half of them filmed it. It's real. Arabella entered the room, eyes swollen from crying. Marcus isn't answering my calls, she said. What are we going to do? The wedding proceeds, Veronica said firmly. We've come too far. The press can be spun. The vendors are paid. You are walking down that aisle. No, but, Martin interrupted. We manage this. Like we always do. Arabella stared at them both. You're acting like nothing happened. Veronica's tone sharpened. This is your marriage, Arabella. To a man whose family is now trying to ruin ours. Or do you think all this attention is coincidence? Martin lowered his voice. There's something else. Something about Marcus's grandmother. Veronica dismissed him with a wave. She's nobody. No, Martin said, his eyes dark. She's not. He stood abruptly and left the room. In his private study, he opened a hidden panel behind a portrait of his father. A wall safe clicked open. Inside was a folder, yellowed and dusty, marked confidential. Martin spread out old documents, photographs, clippings, contracts. There, in a 1987 newspaper article, Langston Medical Technologies unveils cardiac monitoring breakthrough. The photo showed a younger Miriam Langston beside her husband, Dr. Elijah Langston, at a podium holding a prototype of the very device Braxton Health had built its fortune upon. Further down the article, Braxton Industries acquires full production rights following strategic partnership. Martin's hands trembled. His gaze lingered on a government-stamped folder labeled MLT 731. Most of it was redacted, but the portions that remained sent a chill through his bones. Across the estate, Marcus knocked at his grandmother's door. We should leave, he said the moment she opened it. I can't marry into this. Not after last night. Miriam, still in her morning shawl, stepped aside to let him in. Running won't fix anything. I'm not running. I'm walking away from a lie. You think I raised you to quit when the truth gets heavy? He studied her face. Uncle Leonard said, you've been hiding things. About patents. About who you really are. Miriam's eyes softened, but her voice remained composed. Your grandfather and I created something real. And the Braxtons, they took it. Stole it. Yes, she said simply. And buried us in the process. Before she could say more, Sydney burst into the room, waving her phone. The video hit 2 million views. People are boycotting Braxton Health. Their stock is tanking. Marcus groaned. What were you thinking? I was thinking someone had to see what they did to Grandma, Sydney said defiantly. Miriam placed a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't wrong, but timing matters. Outside the estate gates, a black sedan passed through security. Inside was a man in a dark suit, an investigator of sorts. He delivered a leather folder to Miriam later that morning. It's all there, he said. Financial records, patent trails, shell company breakdowns, offshore accounts. She nodded, accepting the folder. And the board, still unaware that Langston Holdings owns 41% of Braxton Health. But the whispers are growing. Let them whisper, Miriam replied. Truth doesn't need to shout. By noon, the whispers had turned into a roar. In the heart of the city, the executive board of Braxton Health convened an emergency meeting. 12 members sat around a polished oak table, expressions ranging from nervous to outraged. At the head, a corporate attorney read aloud. As per Article 7 of the corporate charter, Langston Holdings, possessing 41% of company shares, has called for a vote of no confidence in current leadership, citing ethical violations and historical fraud. Gasps rippled through the room. Who the hell is Langston Holdings? One board member demanded. The attorney adjusted his glasses. According to these documents, Langston Holdings has been a silent equity partner since 1988. Their shares were accumulated discreetly over 3 decades through a network of subsidiaries and investment vehicles. But who's behind it? The attorney hesitated. Miriam Grace Langston. Back at the estate, Arabella sat in her bridal suite, staring blankly at her untouched gown. Her bridesmaids whispered nervously. Flowers filled the room, gifts stacked high, but everything felt like a funeral. When Veronica entered, Arabella stood. Tell me the truth. What's happening? Veronica offered a tight smile. It's under control. No, it's not, Arabella said, her voice trembling. The stock is crashing. Marcus isn't here. And Dad's locked in his study. What aren't you telling me? Veronica's smile cracked. Ask your father, she said, and swept out of the room. Arabella didn't wait. She stormed to Martin's study and pushed open the door. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, voice urgent. I said transfer everything to the Caymans. Now, before the markets close. He froze when he saw her. Arabella, shouldn't you be getting dressed? Stop, she said. No more lies. Tell me what's going on. Martin sighed. There are things you don't understand. Then help me understand. He poured a drink and gestured for her to sit. Your fiancé's grandmother, Miriam Langston, she and her husband invented the cardiac device that launched our medical division. Arabella blinked. I thought that came from our R&D team. That's what we told the world. But it was the Langstons' work. We acquired it through technicalities. You stole it. Martin looked away. We protected it. They were two unknowns with no funding. We gave their invention a future and erased their names in the process. Martin's face hardened. Business is rarely clean, Arabella. And now she's come back. With evidence. With leverage. With power. Arabella's voice broke. Marcus didn't know? Martin shook his head. No. But it doesn't matter. His grandmother has been playing a long game. 30 years of building position, using shell companies. Now she's poised to dismantle everything. Meanwhile, Miriam stood alone in the Braxton Estates private gallery, a curated shrine to the family legacy. Framed awards, invention prototypes, philanthropic milestones, all pointing to a carefully constructed myth. She stopped before a display case housing the original prototype of the cardiac monitor. A plaque read, Developed under the leadership of Martin Braxton, 1989. She scoffed quietly. A tour guide approached. Interested in our medical innovations? Deeply, she replied, her tone soft but loaded. It's always fascinating to see how history is repackaged. Back in Marcus's guest room, he opened the small trunk his grandmother had left him that morning. Inside, old ledgers, letters, financial statements, photos of his grandfather with international dignitaries. One document stood out, a patent application. Inventors, Dr. Elijah Langston, Miriam G. Langston. Scrawled annotations showed the patent's quiet reassignment through Braxton Industries shortly after a hospital board meeting in 1987. Marcus's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Mr. Langston, a voice said. We're calling on behalf of parties tracking activity within Braxton Health. They've begun attempts to liquidate hidden holdings. Who are you? A friend. They suspect who the silent partner is. They're panicking. Because justice is coming. After the call, Marcus sat in stunned silence. The papers around him were more than evidence. They were a legacy, long denied and now undeniable. In the distance, the wedding hour approached. But the ceremony would not go as planned. The Braxton Estate Gardens had been transformed into a fantasy, white rose petals scattered along a velvet aisle, chairs aligned with military precision beneath golden arches. A quartet played Vivaldi softly as society's elite took their seats. Security kept the press at bay, though long-lens cameras captured what they could from the tree line. Several notable guests had quietly canceled too much bad press, but most still came, drawn by curiosity, power, or the need to be seen. Marcus stood at the altar, flanked by his best man and two groomsmen. His navy tuxedo fit perfectly. His jaw was tight. In the crowd, the Langston family sat together, Denise, Leonard, Sidney, dressed with elegance, carrying the kind of poise that comes not from money, but from earned dignity. But Miriam was not with them. She had been seated several rows back, deliberately. Guests noticed. A woman in a pale green dress leaned toward her companion and whispered, Is that his grandmother back there? Not exactly center stage. She doesn't match the decor, the companion replied with a smirk. Unbeknownst to them, Sidney had her phone rolling. Again, the music swelled. Arabella emerged, escorted by Martin. Her gown was exquisite, her posture perfect, her smile faint and flickering. As she walked down the aisle, she glanced toward Marcus. His expression gave her pause. The officiant cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus Elijah Langston and Arabella Margaret Braxton in holy matrimony. The words felt surreal. When it came time to exchange vows, Arabella went first. Her voice was shaky, but sincere. I promise to stand beside you, to honor your past and build our future, to be your anchor, your partner, your peace. Then it was Marcus's turn. He held the ring in one hand, looked out at the crowd, Braxton's on one side, Langston's pushed to the periphery, and then his eyes landed on Miriam. She nodded. Marcus turned back to Arabella. I had vows prepared, he began. Beautiful ones. About love. About forever. A few guests smiled politely. But I can't say them. Not while we're surrounded by lies. The air shifted. Arabella's eyes widened. Marcus. He held up a hand. Are we really going to pretend this is a sacred union while your family mocks mine? While my grandmother, who built a legacy, sits in the back like a footnote. While the very company that brought your family fortune was founded on what was stolen from hers. Martin stood up. That's enough. No, Marcus said, voice rising. It's never the time, is it? Never the place. Always later. Quietly. Respectfully. Well, today is the place. He turned to the guests. Look at her, he said, pointing to Miriam. 40 years ago, she and my grandfather invented a device that saved millions of lives. Your medical divisions were built on it. But their names were erased, and their reward was silence. Gasps. Phones came out. Recording. Broadcasting. Miriam rose and stepped forward. Slowly. With intention. She stood beside Marcus, her hand gently on his shoulder. I love you, he said to Arabella, voice cracking. But I can't marry into a family that buries the truth beneath orchids and champagne. He turned. Walked away. Miriam followed. Then Denise. Then Leonard. Then Sydney, who spun around to catch the stunned crowd on camera before she slipped away. Arabella stood frozen at the altar, dress shimmering like armor in the sun. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. Her mother was already instructing security to confiscate phones. Martin stormed down the aisle. But it was too late. The exodus had begun. Online, #BraxtonShame tripled in reach. That evening, in a secure suite downtown, Miriam sent an encrypted file, financials, patents, testimony, to every major news outlet, agency, and activist investor in the country. Her only message. Justice. 40 years late, but right on time. By the next morning, the Braxton name was radioactive. News anchors led with the story across every major network. Breaking. Braxton Health under federal investigation for intellectual property theft dating back decades. A viral wedding walkout leads to corporate collapse. Accompanying visuals. A young Marcus Langston leaving the altar, his hand held by an elderly black woman in navy silk. Miriam. The image became iconic in hours. In the Braxton mansion, FBI agents swarmed. Government-marked SUVs filled the circular drive. Legal teams tried to stall the inevitable. Martin Braxton stood pale and still as a lead agent read aloud. We have warrants for financial fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. We are seizing all company documents dating back to 1985. His lawyers whispered frantically, but the agents moved fast. Outside the gates, reporters shouted, Is it true Braxton Industries was built on stolen patents? What can you tell us about Miriam Langston? Was the wedding cancellation related to the federal raid? Inside, Veronica barked into her phone. I don't care what it costs. Shut this story down. But no one was answering her calls anymore. Even family friends were distancing themselves. Investors issued public statements condemning the leadership. Longtime partners backed out of deals. The company's stock plummeted, crashing through 5 halt points in one day. And then came the board vote. Martin Braxton was removed as CEO by unanimous decision. No fanfare. No resistance. Just the cold formality of collapse. Elsewhere, in a quiet hotel suite overlooking the skyline, Marcus and Miriam watched it unfold. Screens glowed with news alerts. Stocks. Headlines. Talk show reactions. Think pieces. Marcus sat in silence, hands steepled under his chin. Miriam poured tea. They're calling it justice, Marcus said quietly. But it feels like a funeral. Miriam stirred her cup. Justice often is a funeral, she said. A burial of illusions. Of comfort bought with silence. You knew it would go this far? I knew the truth would rise when the air was ready for it. He turned to her. Why didn't you ever tell us the whole story? She looked at him then, not with regret, but with resolve. If I told you too soon, it would have crushed you. You needed to be strong enough to carry it, to survive it, and now, to lead it. That evening, Miriam gave a closed-door briefing to a room full of journalists. No podium, no lights, just files. Proof. 41%, she said, laying down documents. That's how much of Braxton Health was quietly reacquired through E. Langston Holdings. Funded through the very profits they thought we'd never touch. Photos of her husband. Patents. Lab notebooks. Redacted legal threats. Private settlements. Court filings that were never allowed to see light. I am not seeking revenge, Miriam said. I am reclaiming credit, correcting the record, and redistributing the stolen future of my family. When asked what she wanted, she answered, 1. Public acknowledgement of Dr. Elijah Langston's role in the creation of the Braxton Cardiac Monitor. 2. A full renaming of Braxton Health's cardiac division. 3. The establishment of a fund to support Black innovators in medicine. 4. Complete structural reform of the board. The press room was stunned. The next morning, the New York Times ran a front-page feature. The woman who brought down a dynasty. Miriam Langston spent 4 decades in silence. She broke it in a single weekend. And across the country, conversations began, not just about the Braxtons, but about who gets remembered and who gets erased. In the days that followed, the Braxton estate emptied out like a palace in decline. Federal agents boxed up files, servers, and financial records. Priceless art was appraised for seizure. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above hollow halls. Veronica Braxton sat on the edge of a velvet chaise, watching movers take down the portrait of Martin's father, his proud eyes forever frozen in oil paint. Martin himself had retreated to his study. His face, once smug with generational power, now looked gaunt and drawn. She took everything, he muttered. Veronica didn't correct him, but the truth was simpler. Miriam Langston hadn't taken anything. She had reclaimed what was hers. In a small downtown apartment, Arabella Braxton scrolled endlessly through social media feeds. The wedding that wasn't had become a national saga. Hashtag Langston legacy. Hashtag Braxton shame. Hashtag justice served. And now, The Langston Report, a documentary miniseries greenlit by a major streaming platform, led by none other than Sidney Langston. Arabella's phone buzzed with interview requests, brand cancellations, and influencers denouncing her silence. Even old friends didn't return her messages. She stared at photos of her and Marcus. Campus days, their first anniversary, his birthday dinner last year. Memories that now felt like someone else's life. Then, a message popped up. Marcus Langston, I'm at the cafe on Grand and Jackson. If you want closure. Arabella didn't hesitate. At the Quiet Corner Cafe, Marcus sat in a hoodie, unshaven but grounded. Arabella entered slowly, her posture humble, eyes puffy from crying. Thank you for meeting me, she said. Marcus nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping bitter coffee. Arabella finally spoke. I didn't know. I believe you, Marcus said softly. But your family did. And when the moment came, you looked away. I froze. I know, he said. We all freeze, until we decide to act. She looked up, pain in her eyes. Do you hate me? No, Marcus said. But I don't trust what we had anymore. Because I was building something real, and you were walking on marble floors built on someone else's bones. Tears spilled over. I'm sorry. I know, he replied. And maybe that's enough. Just not enough for forever. They parted with a quiet hug. No vows. No rings. Just a shared grief for what love could not survive. That week, Miriam Langston was honored at the National Medical Ethics Forum. She wore a black suit, pearl earrings, and her late husband's lapel pin, a gold heart overlaid with a circuit pattern. She stepped to the podium. Calm, collected, commanding. For too long, innovation has had a color. Recognition has had a gait. And history has had an eraser. I came here today not to celebrate my victory, but to remind you all, the truth doesn't vanish. It just waits for a microphone. The crowd rose in ovation. Later that night, at her hotel, Miriam received a letter. It bore the presidential seal. You are hereby awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Miriam smiled faintly and set it aside. Let them give the award to my husband instead, she told her assistant. His name is the one they forgot. Meanwhile, Arabella quietly resigned from all family boards and began working at a women's shelter in the city. She used her event planning background to raise money, organize donation drives, and write grants. One night, she spoke at a small local panel about wealth and accountability. Privilege isn't evil, she said. But unexamined privilege becomes cruelty. I didn't just benefit from injustice. I ignored it. And the cost was the love of my life. Back at Riverside Community College, Marcus returned to teaching financial literacy, helping working-class families avoid predatory loans and rebuild credit. His lectures carried new weight. He had lived the system, and he had broken through. On Sundays, he visited Miriam. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes they worked on a foundation she'd established, the Elijah Langston Institute for Black Medical Innovation. But most often, they just talked about power, about patience, about what comes next. 6 months after the wedding that never was, a bronze statue was unveiled at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. It depicted two figures standing side by side. Dr. Elijah Langston in a lab coat, one hand on a cardiac monitor prototype. Miriam Grace Langston beside him, not behind, holding a folder of blueprints in one hand and a pen in the other. The plaque read, Elijah and Miriam Langston, visionaries, innovators, erased, but never silenced. Marcus stood beside his grandmother as the curtain dropped. She wore a deep blue coat, her silver hair pinned back, her cane replaced by a quiet, steady posture. Reporters flooded the steps. Flashes went off. Yet Miriam didn't speak to cameras. She simply turned to her grandson and said, Now they can't pretend we weren't here. At a private dinner later that evening, donors and thought leaders gathered to celebrate the official launch of the Langston Fund for Medical Equity. Seated with a portion of the Braxton Health liquidation and matched by anonymous allies who had once worked with Miriam in the shadows. Sidney Langston, now 23 and already a respected documentary filmmaker, accepted an award for her series Erased, The Hidden Black Architects of Innovation. A project that began with her grandmother's wedding moment but had since uncovered dozens of other forgotten names. In her speech, Sidney said, We tell ourselves that history is written by the victors. But sometimes, it's just written by the loudest. My grandmother taught me that legacy isn't about who shouts the most. It's about who lasts the longest. Elsewhere, Arabella watched the coverage from her modest apartment. She had refused her family's offer to move abroad, choosing instead to live simply, to give back. When asked by a local paper why she stayed, she replied, Because you don't get to flee what you helped build. You fix it, one brick at a time. She and Marcus occasionally crossed paths at nonprofit galas and public education events. They spoke with quiet civility, never rekindling romance, but always with a faint mutual respect. Some silences heal. Others remain. One crisp autumn morning, Julian, Marcus's given name, used only by family, found Miriam sitting in the garden behind her brownstone, sorting through old papers. This came for you, he said, handing her an embossed letter from the White House. Another award. Another honor. She smiled, unread. I'm tired of trophies, she said. Let's talk about impact. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a plan for a new initiative, a makerspace and mentorship hub for Black teens interested in biomedical engineering. They would name it the Horizon Lab. You'll run it, she said without asking. He nodded. Of course he would. 3 months later, Miriam Langston quietly withdrew from public life. She sold her city properties, declined all future interviews, transferred her remaining business interests into a blind trust managed by the Langston Institute. She retired to a small, unnamed cottage in the mountains of Vermont. There, surrounded by trees and silence, she grew a garden, tended to bees, read, and sometimes, when neighborhood children passed by and asked who she was, she'd reply, Just someone who remembers a lot of things the world tried to forget. Back in the city, Marcus walked the halls of the Langston Institute, now bustling with interns, grant recipients, and scholars. On the wall near the entrance, there was no marble dedication, no bust. Just a single quote stenciled in black. Don't wait for a seat at the table. Build your own table. And make it longer. 5 years later, the Langston Institute for Medical Equity had chapters in 8 cities. Its flagship campus in D.C. featured a startup incubator for underrepresented medical innovators, a digital archive of historically erased Black scientists, a grant program named after Dr. Elijah Langston, and, at the heart of it all, a glass-walled library bearing the name Miriam G. Langston. Inside that library, a 12-year-old girl from South Philadelphia sat cross-legged, flipping through a children's biography titled The Woman Who Waited. Her eyes sparkled. She turned to her mother and whispered, I want to build something like she did. That same week, Marcus was invited to speak at the UN's Global Innovation Summit. He declined. Instead, he appeared at a community fundraiser in Baltimore, helping a group of local teens pitch a low-cost mobile heart monitor, built with repurposed circuit boards and 3D printed parts. Afterward, a reporter asked him, Why here, when the world stage is waiting? Marcus smiled. Because this is where the next Elijah and Miriam are waiting. The world will find them. I just have to keep the light on long enough. In Vermont, Miriam Langston still tended her garden. Every morning, she watered sunflowers and wrote in a leather-bound journal. Letters to her husband, to Marcus, to future generations. Sometimes, neighborhood children would wander up her dirt path and sit with her on the porch. They didn't know the full story, but they knew she had once done something important. And when one little boy asked her, "Did you really take down a whole company?" she just laughed softly and replied, "No, sweetheart. I just told the truth. And the truth took care of the rest." Epilogue. One spring morning, Marcus received a final envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a letter. His grandmother's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't be sad. I had a long life and a long memory. You once asked me why I waited so long. Here's why. Because change is fragile. Like glass. If you move too fast, it shatters. If you move too slow, it clouds. But when the time is just right, it reflects the whole sky. Build your sky, child. Grandma Miriam." Marcus folded the letter and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he walked into the next board meeting of the Institute, where dozens of young scientists of every color, gender, and background waited for guidance, for funding, for belief. And he began. Seedling 1. Justice doesn't arrive with noise, but with patience. Justice doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes, it arrives on quiet feet. Miriam Langston didn't seek revenge through rage. She spent decades building silent power, collecting evidence, influence, and leverage. The story teaches us that enduring patience, not explosive reaction, is what makes justice lasting. Real change requires time, strategy, and preparation. Compass 2. Dignity doesn't need permission. You don't have to ask permission to be treated with dignity. Miriam never apologized for her presence. Even when she was seated in the back or quietly dismissed, she held her head high and walked into the halls of power until they had to step aside. The lesson. No one has the right to grant you worth. You already have it. What matters is never letting others define you. Brain 3. Knowledge is the quietest power, but the strongest. Miriam wasn't just the supportive wife of a scientist. She was a strategist, an investor, a builder of a hidden business network, all fueled by observation, intelligence, and insight. The lesson. Knowledge is a weapon. When you understand the system, you can master it or dismantle it. Waterwave 4. Silence can be strength, but also complicity. The story also exposes those who chose to stay neutral in pivotal moments, like Arabella, the board, the wedding guests. The lesson. When you remain silent in the face of injustice, you're siding with it. Change doesn't require a crowd. It just needs one voice at the right moment. Blossom 5. Legacy isn't money, it's the impact you leave. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you force into the light. Miriam left behind no mansions or medals. Her legacy was a generation empowered, the truth restored, Black children seeing themselves honored in history for the first time. Pushpin in conclusion. This story is a declaration about silent justice, the power of memory, and how one woman's wisdom and patience rewrote the course of history. Fire and finally, justice delayed isn't always justice denied, but it must be justice remembered.